There is a voice on the other end of every 911 call that most people never think about. Not the dispatcher. The dispatcher is trained, prepared, professional, a person whose entire function is to remain steady while the world on the other end of the line comes apart. The voice most people don't think about is the one calling. What it sounds like when it drops to a whisper mid-sentence because something in the house has changed and the whisper is suddenly the only safe volume available. What it sounds like when it stops answering questions altogether and the line goes quiet in a way that is nothing like the quiet of a disconnected call. The disconnected call has a clean, electronic finality, a sound like a door closing, and the dispatcher knows what that is. The open silence is different. The open silence means the person is still there and has made a decision that speaking is no longer an option. What a dispatcher hears in the 3 seconds before a caller says the words that change the nature of everything. What they hear in the silence after those words when the caller cannot speak. A dispatcher in rural Tennessee received a call at 2:14 a.m. from a woman who whispered her address clearly and correctly and then said 4 words before the line went quiet. "He's already inside. Hurry." Officers arrived in 11 minutes. The woman was found unharmed. The point of entry was a window that had been unlocked from the inside. The woman lived alone and had not unlocked it. The lock was in the interior unlocked position, which meant someone inside the house had turned it. The window screen had been removed and replaced from inside. The glass of water on her coffee table was still cold when the officers found it. Someone had been comfortable enough in that house, while she slept, to get themselves a glass of water from her kitchen. A dispatcher in Suburban, Ohio took a call from a man who said he was calling because he heard someone in his basement. The man described the sounds as the dispatcher kept him on the line. Footsteps, a door, the specific sound of a person moving through a space with the familiarity of someone who has moved through it before. The officers arrived and searched the basement. They found no one. They found in the basement's back storage room, a folding cot, a used blanket, a battery-powered lantern that was still warm from recent use. And on the wall, a calendar with dates circled in red. The circled dates corresponded, the homeowner confirmed one by one, to every night he had been away from the house across a 3-month period. Not one night he had been home was circled. And the last one. A dispatcher received a call at 3:41 a.m. that showed as originating from a number registered to a house that had been vacant for 3 years. A foreclosed farmhouse on a rural county road. No active utilities, no registered occupant. The phone line disconnected as part of the foreclosure process 27 months before this call. A disconnected line called the Emergency Communications Center. The dispatcher answered. There was no voice. 4:41 seconds there was breathing, calm, unhurried, even breathing, the breathing of someone who was simply present in a space and had no urgency about the situation. At the 47-second mark, before the line disconnected, a single sound that the dispatcher has described in every account she has given since as the specific sound of a door being closed from the inside. The latch engaging. The space becoming slightly more enclosed. 8 calls. 8 nights where the system built to keep people safe encountered something the system was not designed to contain. 8 dispatchers who answered the line and kept it open and stayed with what was on the other end of it, because staying is what the job asks and because the person on the line needed someone to stay. What follows is what was on the line. The call came in at 2:14 a.m. on a Wednesday in October, and Carol, 9 years on the overnight at a rural Tennessee emergency communications center, a woman whose professional life had given her a calibrated and unsentimental understanding of what a call could contain, knew within the first 4 seconds that this one was different in the specific way that the worst calls are different, and she had been taking calls long enough to know what that specific difference felt like when it arrived. It was not what the caller said. It was how she said it. The woman on the line gave her address in a whisper of a particular kind, not the whisper of someone trying to be quiet in a general sense, but the whisper of someone who has assessed the acoustics of their immediate situation and determined that the sound they produce must travel exactly as far as the phone and no further. Control to a degree that required active effort. Precise in the way that precision under extreme stress is precise. Not careful but urgent, the urgency driving the words into their correct form with a force that had nothing to do with volume. The address came out correctly, completely, in the right sequence because the woman on the other end of that line understood that her address might be the single most important thing she would ever say aloud, and she was going to say it right. Carol confirmed it. She logged it. She had the unit dispatched before the next thing happened. The woman said 4 words. "He's already inside. Hurry." Then the line went quiet. Not disconnected. Quiet in the way of an open line maintained by a person who has made a decision that speaking is finished for now. The ambient sound of a residential interior at 2:14 a.m. in rural Tennessee, the particular acoustic quality of a house at night, the faint, barely there sounds of a building doing what buildings do in the dark. And within that ambient sound, the presence of a person breathing carefully enough that the breathing was more felt than heard. Carol had 11 minutes. 11 minutes between the moment the unit was dispatched and the earliest it could arrive. 11 minutes of an open line and a woman on the other end who had stopped speaking and was holding still somewhere in her house in the dark. Carol spoke. She spoke in the register she had developed across 9 years of calls like this one. Not the volume of ordinary conversation, but the volume of something that would carry down a phone line to a person in a dark room without carrying past it. She said, "I hear you. I'm here. Units are on their way. You don't have to speak. Just stay on the line." She said it and she meant it, and she kept her voice level, and she began managing her second line simultaneously, keeping the unit updated with the specific, clipped efficiency of someone conducting 2 conversations at once, one of which was using everything she had. For 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the line held its quiet. Then, from somewhere in the distance of the open connection, not close to the phone, not from the woman's position, from a different location in the house, a sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across a carpeted surface with the specific sound that weight on carpet makes when the weight is moving carefully but not rushing. Not the frantic transit of someone trying to cover distance quickly. The measured movement of someone who knows where they are going and has decided that pace is less important than quiet. Moving through the house at 2:14 a.m. the way a person moves through a space they know well enough to navigate in near darkness. The footsteps came closer to the phone. Carol tracked them across the ambient recording of the open line, her training telling her what the sound meant and her body responding to what her training told her, while her voice stayed exactly as it was, level, small, steady. The footsteps stopped. 60 seconds of silence. Then the woman's voice, lower even than the whisper she had used before, a breath given the shape of words rather than words spoken. "He's right outside the door." Carol kept the line. She kept her voice. She kept the unit updated on the secondary. She told the woman the officers were close. She told her she was doing everything right. She told her to stay still and stay quiet. She told her she was there. The footsteps resumed. Moving away this time, back the direction they had come from. Down a hall by the sound of the acoustic shift. A door, the specific sound of a door handle being tested, found to have resistance, released. The woman had locked herself in a room. At 9 minutes, faint in the background of the open line, the first sound of sirens. The woman was near a window. The sirens reached the phone. In the 30 seconds before the officers reached the front door, the footsteps again. Fast this time, the rapid, decisive transit of someone who has received information and is acting on it. Not panic. Decision. Moving through the house toward the back, toward an exit, moving with the speed of someone who has done this before and knows what to do when it is time to leave. A door. Not the locked bedroom door. The rear of the house. The officers entered. They found the woman in the locked room, physically unharmed, in the specific condition of a body that has been holding pure terror for 11 minutes and has been told it can stop now. Shaking, barely able to form words, her phone still in her hand with the line still open and Carol still on it. They searched the house. The kitchen window's interior lock was in the unlocked position. Scuff marks on the sill consistent with entry and exit in both directions. In the living room on the coffee table, a glass of water. The woman confirmed she had not placed it there. An officer touched the glass. Still cold. Someone had been in her house long enough to get a glass of water. Had been comfortable enough in her living room to sit there. Had heard her wake, or had been waiting for her to wake, and had moved toward her bedroom with the patient, unhurried quality of someone who was not worried about what came next. No one was found in the surrounding area. The footprints in the soft ground outside the kitchen window ran to the fence line and stopped. She moved out within the week. She and Carol have spoken twice in the years since. Carol told me she has taken hundreds of calls in 9 years. She can count on both hands the ones that come back to her in the specific way that some calls do. Not frequently, not every day, but reliably in the quiet hours. She told me the glass of water is what comes back most. The cold glass of water on her coffee table at 2:14 a.m. Placed there by someone who had been in that house long enough to feel at home in it. Long enough to want something. Long enough to get it. She carries that. The basement call came in at 10:47 p.m. on a Friday, and Greg, 12 years on the overnight in Suburban, Ohio, a man who had heard every variation of the prowler call and could distinguish the nervous homeowner call from the genuine threat call within the first 30 seconds, logged it initially as a standard report. By the time the unit arrived 30 minutes later, he had revised his assessment completely. The caller was Dennis, 40 years old, home alone in the house he had owned for 6 years. He had come downstairs for a glass of water at 10:40 p.m. and had heard from the basement the sound of the third step on the basement stairs. The third step had a creak, a specific, unmistakable creak that Dennis knew with the intimacy of something you have been meaning to fix for 2 years and have heard every single time you use those stairs. He had been meaning to fix it since the first month in the house. He had not fixed it. He heard it every time he went to the basement, and he had developed, across 6 years, the particular unconscious relationship with a familiar sound that makes its presence in an unexpected context immediately and distinctly wrong. He had not gone to the basement that evening. The third step had creaked. He called from the kitchen with his voice at a normal volume. He had not yet arrived at the level of processing that produces whispering, which told Greg something about where Dennis was relative to the threat and something about Dennis's temperament, which was clearly one of the methodical rather than reactive variety. Greg took the address, dispatched the unit, kept Dennis on the line, and asked him to describe what he was hearing. This was the element of the call that Greg has returned to across 8 years since. Not the initial report, not the arrival of the officers, not even the findings in the basement. The description Dennis provided in real time, and what the description revealed about the person in his basement. Footsteps first, slow, deliberate, moving from the stair end of the basement toward the far wall. Pause. Then movement back toward the stairs, then redirected, the specific route adjustment of someone orienting themselves in a space they know but are moving through in darkness. Then a door. Dennis described the door before it opened. The interior storage room in the basement's far corner, a hollow core door that had a specific problem in humid weather. It stuck in its frame and required a particular technique to open, a pull at the top right corner of the door combined with a simultaneous lift of the handle. He had learned the technique in his first month in the house. He had never told anyone about it. The door opened on the first try. Dennis said, in the specific vocal register of a person who has just understood something. They know this house. Greg heard it. He has described it to me as the moment the call changed category, not a prowler report, not an unknown person in a residence, but something that required a different framework that he did not yet have. He kept Dennis talking. He kept the unit updated. He calculated the arrival time and did the math on the gap. The footsteps in the basement continued, methodical, purposeful movement through the space that was not the movement of searching but the movement of familiarity. Moving through the basement the way you move through your own space, without hesitation, without the tentative quality of someone finding their way. Then the footsteps stopped. For minutes before the unit arrived, Dennis said, "There's a light on in the storage room. I can see it under the door." He paused. "There's no overhead fixture in the storage room. I've never put a light in there. It's always dark. Someone had brought a light source, had planned for time in the storage room, had come prepared for an extended stay in a room that had no lighting of its own, in a house they had entered while its owner was home, and had set themselves up to be comfortable. The unit arrived. 2 officers, entry through the front with Dennis's key. Full basement search. No one. In the basement's main area, a folding cot of the military surplus variety, the collapsible kind that packs into a carrying bag. A blanket, used pushed to one side the way a person pushes a blanket when they rise from a sleeping position. The storage room, a small battery-powered lantern on the floor near the door, still warm when the officer picked it up, the warmth of recent use. On the storage room's back wall, a paper calendar from the current year, pinned with 4 thumbtacks, standard dollar store variety. 14 dates circled in red. Dennis was asked to stand in the storage room and review the calendar. He stood in the storage room of his own house at 11:15 p.m. and he looked at the 14 circled dates one at a time, and he identified for each one where he had been and why he had been away from the house. His mother's place in Cleveland. A 3-day conference in Pittsburgh. A weekend with his college roommate. A friend's wedding. An overnight for a work meeting. Every circled date was a date he had been away. Not one date he had been home was on the calendar. 3 months of his absence, documented on a wall in his basement storage room. Someone had been coming in when he left and leaving before he returned, sleeping in the space, using the lantern, pulling the storage room door open with the specific technique that the door required, navigating the creaking 3rd stair in both directions. The stair he had been meaning to fix for 2 years. The question Dennis asked the officers that night, standing in his storage room looking at the calendar, has not been answered in the 8 years since. Greg told me it's the question he carries. Dennis said, how did they know when I'd be home? No surveillance equipment was found. No monitoring of his calendar or his communications was confirmed. No suspect was ever identified. Someone had learned his schedule through observation, had watched from somewhere for long enough to know every absence and to use every absence, and to know, apparently, when the absence was ending in time to clear out before it did. He sold the house. He never went back to that neighborhood. He fixed the 3rd stair before the sale closed. He has said since that he wishes he hadn't. That the sound of that stair is a warning he gave away. That if he ever hears it again on any stair in any house, he wants to know what it sounds like. He wants the notification. He wants to know before it's too late to know. The call from the vacant house was logged at 3:41 a.m. and was flagged by the system before Diane had answered it, because the system recognized the originating number, and the originating number was registered to an address that had not had an active phone line for 27 months. Diane was 7 years on dispatch in a county that included a substantial stretch of rural road with a significant number of foreclosed and abandoned properties. The specific geography of an area where the 2008 economic contraction had left structures standing without occupants, where bank processes moved slowly and properties sat in legal limbo for years while the buildings themselves accumulated weather damage and occasional unwanted occupants. She had taken calls from abandoned properties before. Equipment malfunctions, deteriorating wiring, old systems activating without cause. She knew the category. A disconnected line was calling her. She answered with her standard identification and opening, the automatic, practiced response that 9 years of overnight dispatch had made reflexive. No voice responded. She repeated the identification. She asked if someone was there. No voice. But the line was open. She could hear what a trained ear learns to distinguish from dead silence, the acoustic signature of an interior space. The specific way that a room sounds different from open air, the slight dampening of ambient sound, the particular absence of wind and outdoor space resonance, the quality of sound that exists inside walls. She was inside a room. Someone's phone in an empty house was inside a room, and the line was open and there was no voice. She kept the call open. She traced the address, The foreclosed farmhouse on Route 9 that her system had associated with the number, 3 years vacant by the county property records. She dispatched a unit and she stayed on the line because the line was open and staying on the line was her job and because the open line, even with no voice, was telling her something. 4:41 seconds she heard breathing. Not distressed breathing, not the breathing of someone in danger or pain or exertion. Calm, even unhurried breathing. The breathing of someone who was simply present in a space and had no particular urgency about the fact of being there. Comfortable breathing. The breathing of a person in a room who had decided to call 911 from an unactivated phone at 3:41 a.m. and was waiting, with complete equanimity, for whatever happened next. At 47 seconds before the line disconnected, she heard the door. Not a door opening. A door closing from the inside with the specific sound of an interior door being pulled shut from within a room. The latch engaging, the sound of the space contracting slightly around whoever had just enclosed themselves in it. A deliberate, purposeful close. The sound of someone who was done with the part of the night that had involved the phone. Then the line ended. The unit arrived in 14 minutes. 2 officers, exterior check first. The standard approach to an abandoned property where the threat level was unconfirmed. The front door, unlocked. Not forced, not broken. Unlocked from the inside, standing slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it recently or had left it open for a purpose. They cleared the property room by room. 3 bedrooms, a main living area, a kitchen, a basement. The property was empty in every conventional sense. No person present, no food, no clothing, no sleeping arrangement visible. The standard indicators of occupation were absent. In the back bedroom, the room at the property's far end, furthest from the front door and furthest from the road, 3 things. A candle on the windowsill. Not lit when the officers arrived, but the wax around the wick was warm. The specific warmth of wax that has been recently liquid, recently cooling. It had been lit. It had been extinguished or had burned out within the past 30 to 60 minutes. A straight-back chair, positioned in the room's center, facing the window, facing the road. On the windowsill beside the candle, a phone. Not a current model smartphone. An older basic device of the kind sold prepaid at gas stations and dollar stores for cash, without a contract or a registered account. Powered on. The officers confirmed. No active service plan, no carrier account, no registered number. An unactivated device with battery power. An unactivated device that had called 911. Diane knows the technical explanation. Emergency calls bypass carrier requirements. An unactivated phone with battery and signal can reach 911 by design, because the design prioritizes emergency access over service activation. She had known this before the officers called it in. She had known it while she was on the line. What she has thought about for 7 years since is the chair. The chair positioned to face the window. The window that faced the road. The position from which whoever had been sitting in that chair, in that dark room by candlelight, could watch the road. Could see headlights coming up Route 9 from the direction of town. Could know when the unit's lights appeared on the horizon. Could know exactly when to stop breathing. Could know when to close the door. She has driven past that address twice since, on other calls that took her through that county road area. The house has been demolished. The land is cleared and empty now, grass growing where the structure stood, the tree line visible at the field's edge. She looks at it every time she drives past. She is looking for a lit window. She knows there is no window anymore. She looks anyway. The call that Sandra took on a Tuesday night in March began as a domestic disturbance report and became, across the 37 minutes she stayed on the line, something that has required her to expand her understanding of what a domestic disturbance can be and what the word domestic can contain. She was 29, 3 years on dispatch in a mid-sized Pacific Northwest city, with the specific competence of someone who has taken enough calls to have developed her own calibration for what is routine and what is not. The first 30 seconds of this call were routine. A woman named Lena, calling from her apartment to report voices through the wall of the adjacent unit. A man's voice and a woman's voice, raised, the sounds of an argument sustained for approximately 20 minutes. She could hear the emotional intensity of it through the shared wall even if she couldn't make out words. This was not the kind of dispute she felt comfortable ignoring. Standard. Sandra took the address, confirmed the unit, dispatched a patrol, asked Lena to stay on the line and provide context while the patrol was en route. Lena knew the neighbors slightly, a couple who had lived there for about a year, quiet in passing, the kind of neighbors you know by sight and pleasant interaction and not much more. She had never heard anything like this from them before. The sustained quality of it was what had prompted the call. Not one raised exchange but 20 continuous minutes of emotional intensity that had not diminished. The patrol was 4 minutes out. Lena said, "Wait." Sandra asked what was happening. Lena said, "It stopped." Pause. Both voices. Just stopped. Mid-sentence, I think. Both of them at the same moment. Sandra noted it and said that was okay, the patrol would still check the unit. Then Lena said, in a vocal register that had shifted in the specific way that Sandra had learned to track, a tone that was not yet frightened but had begun the movement toward frightened, "There's someone at my door." Sandra asked whether she was expecting anyone. Lena said no. She said it was after 11 p.m. and no one knew she was home and she hadn't buzzed anyone in at the building entrance. Sandra asked whether she could check the door without opening it. Whether the door had a peephole. Lena was already moving. Sandra could hear it in the quality of the ambient sound, the specific audio shift of a phone moving through a space, and under it Lena's footsteps, careful and slow, minimizing her sound in the way that a person minimizes their sound when they understand that sound is information they do not want to give. Then Lena stopped moving. She said in a voice that was now fully quiet, "The handle is moving." Not a knock. Not someone calling her name. The door handle of her locked apartment door, being tried from the outside, slowly, in the specific exploratory way of someone determining whether a door is locked. Sandra had the patrol unit on the secondary line within 2 seconds. She redirected them, not the adjacent unit, the caller's unit, door being tried, possible entry attempt. And she kept Lena on the primary, kept her voice level, told her the officers were close, told her not to open the door, told her to stay on the line. Lena said, "It stopped." The handle was no longer moving. 30 seconds of silence. Then, the argument started again. The argument in the adjacent unit, the voices, the emotional intensity, the sounds of an altercation that had stopped at the exact moment the handle moved and that had now resumed at the exact moment the handle stopped. As if both events were being managed by the same attention. As if the pause in one was the duration of the other. The patrol arrived. They checked the adjacent unit, no disturbance. The couple inside had been watching television all evening. They were not aware of any argument. No evidence of any altercation. No explanation for 20 minutes of sustained voices that Lena had heard through the wall. Lena's door. No marks, no damage, no physical evidence of the handle having been tried. The handle had moved. There was no proof of it beyond what Lena had said while Sandra had listened. 2 reports were filed, covering an incident with no confirmed cause, no identified person, no resolution. Sandra has thought for 5 years about the synchronization. The argument stopping when the handle moved. The argument resuming when the handle stopped. The perfect correspondence of 2 events that should have had no relationship to each other. She has thought about what it means for those 2 events to be perfectly synchronized. She has arrived at one answer she returns to more than the others. They were not 2 events. They were one event, conducted from 2 locations. Whatever had been in the adjacent unit producing the argument sounds had moved to the hallway to try the handle and had moved back when the attempt was complete. She has thought about what it was trying to determine. She has thought about whether the locked door was an answer that satisfied it or an obstacle it filed away for later. The call that Marco keeps in a separate compartment from the rest of his work came in on a Thursday afternoon in June, and the compartment is not sealed. He told me this at the beginning before he described the call. It is accessible and he opens it sometimes, but he has made deliberate choices about when and under what conditions he opens it because some things, he has determined, are better held carefully than handled carelessly. He was 34, 5 years on dispatch in a county emergency communications center in rural Georgia, and the caller was a child. 8 years old, he estimated from the voice, the specific register of a child that age, the thinness and the earnestness of it, the particular quality of a child who is telling you something serious and wants to be understood and has not yet learned the adult habits that complicate serious communication. The child gave an address and then said, "There's a man in our house and my mom isn't answering me." Marco's training engaged completely. He dispatched units, confirmed the address, stayed with the child, and managed everything he said and the way he said it with the full attention of someone for whom the management of a child caller in a potential crisis situation is one of the most demanding tasks the job creates. He asked the child where they were. They were in their bedroom. They had hidden under the bed when they heard the man come in. He asked how the man had come in. The child had heard the front door open. He asked whether the child had seen the man or only heard him. Only heard. The child was under the bed. The child said, "He's walking around downstairs. I can hear him." Marco listened to the child's description as the child listened to the house. Footsteps on the ground floor, moving from room to room, the sounds of a person covering the space below in a systematic way. Not the frantic movement of someone searching. The methodical movement of someone covering ground they know. Then the child said, "He's coming upstairs." 8 minutes until the unit arrived. 8 minutes and the footsteps on the stairs. Marco kept his voice exactly as it needed to be, the specific steadiness of a voice that is trying to be a presence in a child's experience without being a sound that carries past the phone. He told the child to stay under the bed. He told the child the officers were coming. He told the child to stay quiet. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The child's breathing on the line was changing. Shorter, faster, the compressed breath of a small body trying to make itself as small as possible, trying to take up less space in the world than it already occupied. The child whispered, "He stopped outside my door." Marco talked. Quietly, steadily, continuously, the specific unbroken quality of a voice that is trying to be a presence without being a disturbance, that is trying to be heard by one person without being heard by another. He kept talking through the silence that followed. The 90 seconds of the footsteps having stopped outside a child's bedroom door. Then the child said, "He's going back down the stairs." Marco exhaled something he had been holding for 90 seconds. The units arrived. The house was searched. The mother was found on the kitchen floor. She had fainted, a medical event, not violence, complete recovery. The child was safe. No intruder was found. The front door was confirmed locked when the officers arrived. The child, when brought downstairs and reunited with the mother, was asked to describe the sounds in as much detail as they could. The child described them with the precise, attentive detail of a person who had been paying very close attention under very high stress. An officer asked, "Could you tell anything about the man from the footsteps? Whether he was large or small?" The child thought about it, then said, "He wasn't very big. The footsteps weren't heavy. But he walked like he knew where he was going. Like he'd been here before. Like he didn't have to look for anything, he just knew where everything was." Marco has carried those 3 sentences in his compartment for 4 years. Not because of what happened that afternoon. Because of what they imply about what had been happening before that Thursday in June, in the time before the mother fainted and a child called 911 and the lights came on. He does not know how long someone had been walking that house. He does not know whether the officer's arrival was the reason the footsteps went back downstairs or whether whatever had been upstairs had already determined it was done. He keeps the compartment because some things are better stored than fully examined. He examines it anyway. The call from Robert came in at 4:30 a.m. and lasted 17 minutes, which made it one of the longer calls in the County Emergency Communications Center's documented records, And the length was not because of what the responding officers found but because of the call itself and because of Robert, who was the kind of caller that dispatcher Ellen, 22 years on overnight dispatch, the most experienced person in that building on any given night, had rarely encountered in 22 years. Robert was 67, a third-generation resident of the rural Kentucky property from which he was calling, a man whose family had worked that land for more than 100 years and who had developed across his lifetime the specific, unhurried observational capacity of a person who has paid close attention to a specific piece of land for a long time. He called to say there was someone standing in his yard. Ellen asked where. At the tree line. The eastern tree line, approximately 100 yards from the house. She asked how long the person had been there. He said, 2 hours. I've been watching it for 2 hours. She asked why he had waited 2 hours before calling. He said because it hasn't moved. In 2 hours it hasn't moved at all. I wanted to be certain I was seeing what I thought I was seeing and not something else. She asked what he thought he was seeing. He said, a person standing in my yard at 2:30 in the morning who has not moved in 2 hours. That's what I think I'm seeing. And I've confirmed it. She dispatched the unit and kept him on the line. Over the following 11 minutes, Robert described the figure with the patient, systematic precision of a man who had been watching it for 2 hours and had developed a thorough observational account. Adult-sized, standing upright, facing the house. And still, not the stillness of a person who is trying to be still, which produces small, compensating movements, the unconscious adjustments of a living body maintaining its position against gravity and fatigue and the involuntary impulses that bodies produce. This figure made none of those adjustments. It was still in the specific way that objects are still. That things which are not maintaining their position are still because maintenance is not required. At 11 minutes Robert said, it moved. Ellen asked how. Robert said, it took one step toward the house. Just one step. And then it stopped again. She asked whether it had moved since. He said no. The unit arrived. Robert narrated from his window, the headlights coming up the county road, the officers getting out, their flashlights moving across the dark yard toward the tree line. He said, they're at the tree line now. Pause. He said, there's nothing there. The officers searched. At the tree line's edge, a circular area of flattened grass consistent with a person having stood in one place for an extended period. 2 hours of stationary presence in wet grass leaves a specific impression, not a single footprint but a compressed area of sustained contact. The grass was unmistakably flattened. They measured from the flattened area toward the house. One adult stride closer to the house, the grass was flattened again. The impression of a single step, smaller than the standing area, the contact point of a foot making one step and stopping. One step. In the direction of the house. When the patrol car's lights had appeared on the road. Then it was gone. From a location that showed 2 hours of presence and one deliberate step toward Robert's house, in the time between the officers leaving their vehicle and arriving at the tree line. Robert told Ellen on the call before the officers arrived. Whatever it is, it's patient. It's been standing there for 2 hours and it's not in a hurry. That's the part that bothers me most. Not what it is. That it's not in a hurry. He has not seen it since. He has checked the tree line every night. At 2:30 a.m. Every single night for 4 years. Just to confirm. The escalating call. The term used in the Emergency Communication Center's incident files in coastal South Carolina, where Renata has worked dispatch for 14 years, came in on a Saturday in September and lasted 38 minutes and changed character 4 times across those 38 minutes in a way that Renata has described as the most methodical escalation she has encountered in 14 years of overnight work. The caller was N35, home alone while her husband traveled. She called at 9:15 p.m. about a cracked window. Not a break-in, a crack from temperature differential, the kind of thing older coastal houses did in September. She wanted it logged for insurance purposes. Routine. Renata logged it, offered a wellness check and declined. The call ended. 10:47 p.m., and called again. A door she was certain she had closed was open. The side door off the kitchen, closed before dinner, open now. Renata sent a patrol. Officers checked the exterior and found nothing, and accepted the explanation that the door hadn't caught fully. The patrol left. The call ended. 12:20 a.m., and called again. Her voice was at the specific point of approach to frightened. Not there yet, but moving, the voice of someone who has been applying explanations and has run out of ones that satisfy. She had heard footsteps on her porch. The motion-activated porch light had triggered 3 times in the 20 minutes before she called. She had looked through the window and seen nothing. Renata dispatched a patrol. Full perimeter and interior check. Nothing found. And thanked the officers. They left. The call ended. 2:17 a.m., and called for the 4th time. She was whispering, "Someone is in the house." Renata had every available overnight unit dispatched before Anne's 4th word. She told Anne to get to a lockable room, and was already in her bedroom, door locked. She kept Anne on the line, and described the hallway outside the bedroom door. Footsteps approaching the door, stopping at the door. The specific sound of someone standing just outside a closed door, the absence of footstep sound, the presence of proximity. Then, in the 4 minutes before the units arrived, 3 knocks on the bedroom door. Even spaced, deliberate. A normal knock. The knock of someone who wanted the door to be answered. Renata asked what kind of knock, and said, "Like someone who lives here." The units arrived. Entry through the front. Systematic interior search, every room, every possible exit. No one. Every window and door confirmed. No one had left through any of them in the gap between the knock and the officer's entry. The bedroom door showed nothing. No marks. No evidence of contact. Renata has spent 4 years with the 4-call structure of that night and the patience it represents. A cracked window. An open door. A triggered porch light. And then, when the preparation was complete, the approach, the footsteps, the knock. The escalating sequence of a night that built itself deliberately toward a single moment of communication. She has thought about the knock most. About why it knocked when it had demonstrated, through the entire evening, the capacity to remain undetected. When it had evaded 3 separate patrol checks. When it had no practical reason to announce itself. It knocked because the knock was the point. Not entry. Communication. And what it communicated, the knock like someone who lives here, was a specific claim about whose house that was. Not Anne's house. The last call in this account is the one that dispatcher Michael has carried the longest, and he was careful to tell me when he agreed to share it, that what he carries is not the threat. The threat was real, but the threat is resolved in the way that concrete, investigable threats resolve. What he carries is a detail at the end of the account that the threat's resolution did not resolve, that exists independently of the investigation's outcome, that is about something more specific and more lasting than what was found under the bed. Michael was 46, 11 years on overnight dispatch in a suburban Virginia county, when Grace called at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in January. She was 58, calling not to report a current emergency but to formally document evidence of something she believed had been occurring over the previous 4 months. Repeated unauthorized entry into her home, she believed, though she acknowledged she had no direct evidence of a person and understood how each individual piece of evidence sounded when presented without the others. He asked her to describe the evidence. She described it methodically, in the organized way of someone who had been compiling it in her own mind for months and had arranged it into a presentable sequence. Objects moved, small items, household objects repositioned in ways she could not account for but that she had initially dismissed. Food missing in small amounts, not significant quantities, but recurring, the kind of recurring small loss that she had initially attributed to her own forgetting but that had accumulated into a pattern her forgetting could not explain. A smell in her bedroom sometimes in the mornings, not identifiable, not strong, the ambient presence of something that wasn't the house's own smell. Her cat, which had been a fixed behavior cat for 7 years with consistent routines, had developed 4 months ago a new behavior, sitting in the hallway outside the guest room door and watching it. Every day, multiple times a day, watching the door. Then Grace said, "I know how each of these sounds individually. I've spent 4 months telling myself each one was nothing. But last night I found something I can't tell myself is nothing." He asked what she had found. She said, "A drawing. On the inside wall of the guest room closet. At the back, behind where clothes hang. Someone drew my floor plan." He asked her to describe it. She said, "Every room. Accurately. The furniture is correct. The layout is correct. Someone who had been in every room of my house drew this." She paused. "And there are check marks in some of the rooms. The kitchen. The living room. My bedroom." He asked whether there was a check mark in the guest room. She said no. The guest room has no mark. He asked why she thought the guest room had no mark. She said, "Because the guest room is where he's been sleeping. I don't think you mark the room you're from. I think you mark the rooms you go to from the room you're in." He dispatched a unit immediately. The officers searched the guest room. Under the bed, a sleeping bag rolled and neat. A small canvas bag containing toiletries, travel-sized, the efficient packing of someone managing a long-term arrangement in a limited space. A bottle of water nearly full. A paperback novel, face down on the floor beside the sleeping bag, its pages open. A bookmark was in the book, several chapters from where the pages were open. Someone had been reading the book. Had set it face down on the floor to hold their place while they were away from the room. The bookmark was for the longer-term place, where they intended to return to when the immediate reading session ended. The floor plan on the closet wall was photographed, documented, analyzed. Every room accurately rendered, the furniture correctly placed, the layout precise. The work of someone who had spent time in every room and had paid the kind of attention that produces accurate memory. Check marks in the kitchen. The living room. The bedroom. No check mark in the guest room. No person was found. A window in the utility room showed the entry mechanism, a latch that could be manipulated from outside by someone who had learned how it worked. The sleeping bag and the bag were processed. No DNA database match was identified. No suspect was established. Grace stayed with her daughter. The investigation ran its course and reached its limits. Michael has thought about the drawing every day since. Not the sleeping bag or the toiletries or the months of evidence. These are frightening in the conventional way, the way of concrete threats and real danger, and he has processed that category of frightening in the professional way that 11 years of overnight dispatch enables. The drawing is different. The drawing is a record of attention given freely, over months, to the specific geography of another person's life. The patient accumulation of knowledge about a space, room by room, piece by piece, furniture and layout and the routes between them. Documented. Kept track of. The check marks that said, "I have been here and here and here." The blank guest room that said, "This is where I am from." And the bookmark. The bookmark is the detail he has never been able to put down. The specific, domestic intimacy of a person who was reading before sleep, in someone else's house, in a room they had claimed as their own, keeping their place in a book because they intended to come back and finish it. Who keeps a bookmark? Someone who intends to return. Someone for whom the reading is ongoing and the interruption is temporary and the return is assumed. He has thought about what that moment would have looked like. The moment the arrangement became permanent, if Grace's cat had not sat outside that door, if Grace had not called, if the lights had not come on. He does not know. He is grateful for the cat. He is grateful that Grace noticed. He is grateful she called. 8 calls. 8 dispatchers who answered the line and found something on the other end that their training had prepared them for in category but not in specific weight. The weight of a glass of water still cold on a coffee table at 2 a.m., of a basement calendar with 14 circled absences, of a vacant house where a door closed from the inside, of an argument that paused exactly as long as a door handle moved, of a child describing footsteps that knew where they were going, of a figure that stood for 2 hours and took one step toward a house when the lights came, of a knock on a bedroom door delivered with the ease of someone who considered themselves at home, of a floor plan with check marks in every room and a blank where the sleeping room was. What connects all 8 accounts is the knowledge that each of them reveals, the knowledge that is most difficult to say plainly because it is the most important. The people in these houses were not discovered at random. They were known. They had been watched. Someone had made the specific decision in each case to learn the geography of another person's existence. Their house, their schedule, their habits, their patterns, the specific texture of their daily life as it could be observed and cataloged and used. And had used it in ways that ranged from the passive and the occupied to the edge of something these accounts do not fully disclose. The 911 call is the moment the invisible becomes audible. The moment the patient, careful, invisible work of someone else's attention and intention reaches a threshold at which a phone is picked up and a number is dialed and a dispatcher says 911, "What is your emergency?" and the answer is, "I am not alone in my house and I don't know how long I haven't been." The caller was inside the house. In all 8 accounts, they were already there when the emergency began. They had been there for a while before that. They were operating on the assumption that no one would notice, because the assumption had held, in each case, for long enough to become confidence. 8 people noticed. 8 dispatchers stayed on the line. 8 times the lights arrived in time. There are calls where they don't. There are dispatchers who stay on lines that go quiet in ways that are nothing like a disconnected call. There are doors that don't get there. 8 times they did. Check your windows tonight. Not from fear. From the knowledge these 8 calls share. The entry point was always there. The vulnerability was always present. It was simply never examined closely enough. Until it was too late for the examination to matter. If this unsettled you, you're not alone.